Hi guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Max Verstappen has given his perspective on Oscar Piastri's recent title collapse. Is that set to change this weekend in Las Vegas, or are McLaren and Piastri simply doomed because they're not going to be quick enough this weekend? That's what George Russell seems to believe in the context of the World Championship battle. Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc also giving their opinion on all the drama with that team over the last few days. Very much enjoyed to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's begin here because few changes in F1 to announce. Mandatory pit stops. The rumour had it that F1 were looking to do a mandatory two-stop pit stop every race next season. The teams have said, no, that's not the answer. Pirelli, sort your tyres out is effectively the answer. So they're not doing that yet. So Liberty Media has been held off on that one. Max Verstappen would like to see other changes. He wants fewer races, not so many street circuits, a more straightforward calendar, and interestingly enough, actually, only 2-day race weekends. So this has been an idea promoted by James Vowles that says, hey, if we are going to have 24 Grand Prix a year, 25 maybe in the future, who knows where they go, 3-day weekends are tough. It's a 4-day weekend really, right? Because day one is media day, then there's practice, qualifying, race day. The teams are traveling for a couple of those days as well. It's brutal on the team staff, that is for sure. A 2-day race weekend resolves that. Now, what does it mean for the fans? Is it a massive difference? Maybe not. We would still have practice, probably one practice session, then a qualifying, then a race. The drivers don't want to do too much practice. They don't really care. The engineers love it, but the drivers are happy with one practice session. They know these tracks at this point. They don't mind so much. Look, I'm on board generally with this from Max's perspective. As a fan, I quite like watching a couple of practice sessions on a Friday if the timings are good for me. That is not the case this weekend. We'll discuss what Las Vegas looks like from a time perspective in the coming minutes. Fewer street races I would also be on board with as well. The other big drama is on the GPDA, the Grand Prix Drivers Association. They want answers on this incident back in Brazil. Piastri, of course, was penalised. He had the big lockup at turn 1, goes into the side of Kimi Antonelli, takes out poor Charles Leclerc. Now, many look at this instance. My conclusion is, based on the guidelines, it's a clear penalty. But if you look at it from a, let's say, outside perspective, you look at it in isolation, you might argue that it's a bit unfair, given that Antonelli gave him no room. Probably he should have done. Racing incident, you might argue. There's obviously some controversy. Now, look, is this an incident that is worthy of discussion? Yes. Is it the most egregious penalty that I've seen this season? Frankly, no. I think there were certainly, I mean, this is actually kind of a similar one. This one, Behrman on Sainz back in Monza, when Behrman got penalised for this, got a big 10-second penalty, when Sainz completely cut him up. Now, I guess in hindsight, it's not massively dissimilar to what we're seeing with Piastri and Antonelli, but with no car on the outside. There was also the other outrageous penalty, which Sainz got for trying to go around the outside of Lawson, and this is in Zandvoort. So quite a few moments this year where people have been like, that penalty didn't really make any sense. The Grand Prix, I think it was Sainz who's been especially vocal about this, saying that Oscar getting a penalty is unacceptable. Now, look, based on the rules, that is a penalty. Should the rules be changed? That is more so the argument, right? So Sainz says we need an urgent catch-up to resolve this. Everyone that's seen racing knows that's not Oscar's fault at all. Now, I don't entirely agree. I think he does bear some of the consequence. It's not like totally not his fault. He took some level of risk in making that move. But I think that it should be considered a racing incident. That's not how the rules are currently defined. But if you are going to change the rules, you've got to make sure they can be implemented fairly and consistently, because having seen what happened to Behrman back in Monza, and having read the guidelines, you know, I can tell you with a full certainty that Piastri will get penalised for doing that in Brazil, which he did. But the problem is, we kind of want to encourage that type of racing, right? Piastri was well within his rights to take that type of gamble, and I don't want to discourage drivers from doing so. Let's talk about some other things. Max Verstappen, when he was in karting, used to race with number 3. Now, when he came onto the Formula 1 grid, he wanted number 3, but he couldn't get it because that was Daniel Ricciardo's number, so he took the number 33 instead, which has become pretty synonymous with Max Verstappen. Verstappen 33, 33 Verstappen. Yes, for the last couple of years since he won the title, it's been number 1, but assuming that he loses it this year, which he is certainly favoured to do, then what happens next year? What number does he go back to? Does he go back to 33, or does he go back to 3 instead? Now, Max has actually made it quite clear he wants to go back to number 3, not 33. Now, I know that many of his fans, you know, if you've not been following Max since he was like a child, then more than likely you resonate more with 33 for Max than you do with number 3. That's Daniel Ricciardo's number, but Max wants number 3 because that's been the main driving force behind his career before he came into Formula 1. It was only 33 because it had to be. And that number, though, is Danny Rick's. And Ricciardo's only been out of the sport for basically a year, and there needs to be a 2-year gap before you're unable to use those numbers again. So Max is like, I kind of want number 3, but it's not free yet. So he wants to have a conversation as to whether they can make that work. He even said, I actually wanted number 69, but my dad said that's not a good idea. But that number always looks the same, whether it's up or down. No matter how you look at the car, it would also be good for the photos and the marketing and for the caps as well. So, you know, Verstappen always thinking of an opportunity to sell. Let's talk about some of the other comments on the weekend. We have some rear wings spotted. It's a low downforce track. You're going to see some near enough Monza spec rear wings. These were some funny comments as well. So Colapinto and, well, Stroll, and there's been a few dramas. And look, it's towards the back of the grid. I don't massively care, but I thought this was quite funny because Colapinto gave him some criticism, Stroll. Maybe he's frustrated and angry with life. He has 0 points. I don't know. He should probably focus on his own things and try to score some points this year, Lance Stroll says on Franco Colapinto. So, you know, I know that's going to rile some people up. George says this: our goal is to finish second Mercedes in the championship, but we do want to win again this year, and we think the next 2 races are our best chance. Now, if you look over the last few years, that would add up. Mercedes haven't done very well in Abu Dhabi in this era of regulations, but in Qatar they were very competitive in 2023. They've been solid there the last couple of years, and Las Vegas, of course, last year was an absolute demolition job by Mercedes compared to the opposition. But that's not expecting to continue this year. It was a bit of an outlier that Mercedes were able to achieve that last time. They still think, though, they'll be good. Cold conditions, Mercedes versus Ferrari is going to be interesting. I would probably expect Mercedes to be the stronger this weekend, but we'll see if that proves true. Russell, though, believes that Red Bull will be much stronger than McLaren. Again, I'm sure that Mercedes have done their analysis, they've done their estimations, they have some sort of model of what McLaren's car they think looks like. Last year, yeah, McLaren, not a great time at Las Vegas. The year before, McLaren, not a great time at Las Vegas. The only circuit on the calendar that McLaren don't have a podium on is this weekend's Grand Prix track. But is it going to be different this year? Possibly. I don't expect McLaren to be as bad again. But as we've said numerous times, if Max wants to win the title, he has to win this weekend, right? Russell thinks that he can, maybe he even will, believes that Max's and Red Bull are definitely going to be very strong here. And I'd be surprised if they're not, to be honest. I do think the Red Bull should be at least equally strong than McLaren this weekend. Probably stronger. I think that's understandable. For Russell to say that they'll be much stronger is interesting. And if that's true, maybe the championship's not over quite yet. But also it's not great for Oscar in this scenario, right? Because, look, Max is 49 points behind. Oscar is 26 points behind. If Oscar wants to close that gap, he's got to win races, right, to close a significant goal. If Oscar's 3rd and Lando's 4th, if Oscar's 4th and Lando's 5th, that's 3 points, right? It's not a big of a deal enough, or 2-3 points, whichever way you go. Red Bull as well are saying, look, Max, he's tried his best, he's done a great job, but for him to win the title, he's going to need some help from McLaren, right? He will need Norris or even both McLarens to retire. He won't be able to do it on his own anymore. Lando crashed out of this race in 2023, so the championship is not over yet, but technically Max could be out of the fight this weekend if Lando gains 9 or so points over him. Marco says, look, if it comes down to the final race, Max is the strongest. But, okay, that also depends, because if Max is 24 points behind going into the final race, he's still not going to be the favourite, right? But, you know, Max is the strongest, but let's not kid ourselves. McLaren has the fastest car. We're only incredibly fast when everything comes together perfectly. And if that's not the case, we'll have a disaster like the one that we did in qualifying in Brazil. So I think Lando's got a good mentality. He's just talking about, well, I've got to just try and keep winning every weekend and let the championship take care of itself. We'll see if that happens. Then the focus will switch to 2026. And Marco gave a few interesting comments about that as well. He says, look, Mercedes have declared themselves the favourites. Not sure they technically have, but they're certainly not denying it, right? And maybe Toto has at times argued, they should be the strongest. But Marco says, who cares about them? It's unlikely we'll show up with our own engine and be the fastest right away. As long as we're not completely out of contention like we were back with the Renault engine, that's fine. Besides, there are the FIA regulations that allows for adjustments after 6 months. Pretty much what Marco says is they're not expecting to win out of the gates, but they are expecting, or at least hoping, to be able to win races in the second half of next season. That is, let's be honest, unlikely to be enough for Max to win the championship, but who knows exactly where they'll be. But if that's Red Bull's expectation, that the first half of the season is going to be tough, the second half of the season they're going to make progress. If they do make substantial progress and Max is able to win races in the second half of next season, maybe that's enough to convince him to stay. But if they don't, you can imagine Max will be signing a dotted line at some other team. That could involve as well some of the Ferrari boys. We'll discuss them in a second. Lando and Oscar had a few words to say. Thought were kind of interesting. They were discussing their rivalry / friendship, the relationship that they have as drivers. Lando was saying that we're both very happy. It is what it is. Lots of respect. That's always how it's been this season, and that's set to continue. I don't know if that's going to be so true as time progresses, especially with what Max has to say, because he also has a few comments on the scenario at McLaren. It's been a big collapse on Oscar Piastri since Baku, of course. It's been a bit of a nightmare. Clearly, there's been a mental component of that collapse. We heard some talks that a source close to Piastri said that he's one of those characters that publicly will make it, well, at least it appears that everything is all okay. But in fact, lots of those emotions and feelings and frustrations get bottled up, and then, it could all spill over and have a difficult weekend like Baku. Again, there may be other explanations, but McLaren, they were talking in Austin and in Mexico about, well, Piastri, these circuits just don't suit him very well. They're low grip tracks. Lando is in a better spot here. But that excuse or that explanation didn't really hold so much water after Brazil. The team kind of had to talk about it in a slightly different way. And the gap went from a substantial advantage to now a 26-point deficit with just a couple of rounds to go. And Max doesn't really understand it, right? Max says this: the shift is very bizarre. Oscar hasn't suddenly forgotten how to drive. I find it very bizarre. I have no explanation for it. And honestly, I don't know how this is even possible. I don't know what has happened or what hasn't happened, so it's difficult for me to judge, but I would probably have been a bit more annoyed about it, I think, for when you're that far ahead and you're suddenly that far behind. So I think Max is probably looking at it from the perspective of he could never imagine being in that scenario. I don't think Max could ever even contemplate the idea that he might be 20 odd points in front of his teammate and looking really good for the championship. I mean, Oscar, certainly after Zandvoort, was considered to be 80+% favourite for the title at that moment. Max, I think, finds it kind of inconceivable that he could have that type of a lead over his teammate and then all of a sudden his pace seems to vanish and now he's fallen substantially behind in the championship. I don't think Max can envision a world where that's possible, so I think he's struggling to comprehend it. Now, there are understandable explanations. Oscar has struggled at this part of the season before. It's just not been as such high profile. Lando also struggled at the start of the season by his own admission. Lando even said in the press conferences today that, look, he did such a bad job as far as Lando's concerned in the opening races that it would have been impossible to be that bad again. So Lando's like, well, it's just purely regression to the mean, that Lando's found something, he's developed, he's, recognized a better way to drive the car. But Lando was confident at the start of the season that that level of performance wasn't going to stay there forever. So it's arguably gone both ways, but Max definitely finds it confusing, surprising. Bizarre was an explanation for why he has no explanation for why Oscar's pace seems to have somewhat collapsed and Lando's made a serious step. Is there more to it? Is the team doing anything dodgy? Doubtful, in my opinion, but again, there will be perspectives on this either way. Let's see what happens this weekend. A few very interesting words coming out of the Ferrari boys as well. We know that John Elkann made those comments about talk less, drive more and all this. And it's funny because those comments now came out quite a while ago. The Ferrari guys had some time to prepare a response, and Leclerc gave an excellent political response, as he always does. John's a very ambitious person and wants to push everyone. I didn't actually see the news, so again, they're going for this angle. We saw those tweets, right? Leclerc did that tweet and Hamilton did that tweet. Both of them heavily implied that they were responding to some degree to the comment of John Elkann. I find it difficult to believe that they weren't. There was talk about togetherness of the team. There was talk about, keeping on fighting and head down and, working hard. Again, it felt like, given those comments arrived at the same time, just a few hours after Elkann's statement, that they were relevant, but Leclerc and Hamilton are both insistent that they had nothing to do with it. I didn't see the news. Actually, John called me before that, and it's very clear that Elkann's words were simply to inspire the team and push them forward. So that's what I've done, and I will continue to do. We take it as motivation to improve. So great political talking again from Leclerc. Hamilton also said, okay, yeah, you want me to talk less? Fine, I'll do less media commitments. That's okay. But seriously, we all need to take responsibility in this team, and we need to play our part. I know there's so much passion in the team. Every member back at the factory, I think he also went on to say, every single person back at the factory. So the classic Hamilton comment, the challenge for us is to grow in the future. I don't feel like there's a blame culture here. We're all in the same boat. We all have to take accountability and responsibility. Every one of us has to play our part. This was that tweet from Hamilton, right? In the end, it wasn't the race. I back my team, I back myself, I will not give up, etc. So Hamilton says, that wasn't a reaction, I hadn't seen it, I was flying, I only heard about it when I got home. So take it as you will, but I have a little bit of doubt as to whether that's fully the case. Hamilton also said this, because there was a rumour, I mean, this is what Elkann said, he was like, well, focus more on driving was the implication. Hamilton says, look, I think about driving all the time, and understandably, right, it would be expected that he would. He says, I wake up thinking about it, I go to sleep thinking about it, I think about it while I'm sleeping, right? So, you know, it could not be possible to focus more on the driving of the car. That's what Hamilton is talking about there. Carlos Sainz was also asked for his comments, having seen a bit of these politics behind the scenes in his time. You know that frog that has the tea, that's none of my business, Carlos Sainz says. So quite the day for quotes. There's also this quote. So this was a post the other day. I think this is probably Oscar Piastri having got back from Brazil, jet lagged out of his mind to the McLaren Technology Centre. But look at this poor guy, right? Like, they've got him in front of the camera here doing a 30-second little piece to camera about the final few races. He looks not in the greatest mood, and McLaren have made him do this content piece. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because they asked the drivers, certainly Lando, why are you doing all these videos, right? Like, can you do fewer of them maybe? And Lando says the reason why you see fewer videos, again, he said this is a pet peeve, and I get this wrong myself a lot of the time, but it should be fewer videos because it's countable, right? So, okay, whatever. The grammar lesson over. But the reason you see fewer videos of Oscar and I is because we've both asked to do fewer videos. So they don't want to do any of this content, but McLaren are still forcing them to. It is what it is. These are the championship standings. Lando from Oscar, from Verstappen, Russell officially out of the picture. Two final things to mention. As I say, a lot going on today. The first one is this. So Felipe Massa is in court, and part of his claim has been approved to go to the next step. Now, what's interesting about this is the FIA are saying that we succeeded in our judgments. They dismissed the claims. Now, what they dismissed was the fact that Hamilton might ever lose the championship. So Hamilton will be considered 2008 world champion. That is not ever going to change in the court proceedings. But actually, while that has been, that's set in stone, the idea that Massa might get some damages, that is absolutely on the cards. And there's comments of Bernie Eccleston, some other comments that imply to Massa that he was a victim of skullduggery. I'm not going to lie, the use of the term skullduggery already wants me to, hope that he at least gets some money for his troubles. So, the feeling is that he at least has some sort of a claim. The FIA are saying, oh, no, absolutely not, it got thrown out, but that's not really the case. So we'll keep an eye on that. The other thing to keep an eye on here is the weather. There was a lot of talk, but it's been raining a lot in Vegas over the last couple of days. It could rain again, certainly tomorrow. It is possible that during qualifying, maybe there could be some rain. I mean, this is the current forecast. You'll see that there's not much rain anywhere near Las Vegas here. The forecast, as you can see on Friday, there could be a bit of rain. It's going to get pretty chilly as well, but not massively likely. These are the timings, because Vegas it's not really built for it to rain, right? So if it rains, even the strip and everything will be so slippery, it would be really interesting, but we might see a few characters in the war. These are the UK timings. So the race on Sunday is an 8 p.m. start local time, which is 4 a.m. here in the UK, 5 a.m. in Europe. So it is It is early, and practice tonight is at midnight in just over 6 hours' time. Practice 2 is then obviously after that in the early hours of the morning. Qualifying, it's the same story. So, yeah, it's going to be an early one if you're living in the UK and in Europe, but maybe it makes sense for the American audience, at least to some degree, because I think last year it was a 10 p.m. race start in Vegas, which meant that East Coast, it was a 1 a.m. race start, far from ideal. This year it's more sociable for the American time zones, but probably slightly more unsociable for us here in Europe. So it is what it is. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.